A warm welcome, everyone, to our Ergründlich Salon evening Art and AI, Shamans of the Digital Renaissance. I have the very big honor tonight to bridge what we experienced during the day to an evening that is concerning artistic experiences with AI and we experienced a very dense and intense day full of reasoning, theorems, and definitions. And definitions are as well also very important to be able to talk art and AI. And I like to invite Professor Ina Schieferdecker and Professor Robert Geraci to me on stage, so we can talk a little bit about AI and society, engineering and mathematics, and also religion, as we did during the day. Welcome. Ina Schieferdecker is the head researcher of Fraunhofer FOKUS, our co-host for tonight, and also, also importantly, the founding director of Weizenbaum Institute. And Weizenbaum gives us the chance to find an easy bridge of what we tried tonight and what we tried during the day. You are a lead researcher at Berlin Weizenbaum Institute, a place where humanities and social science, arts, design, natural sciences and engineering are brought together, as also in this salon, I might add. The institute's namesake, Joseph Weizenbaum, worked at MIT in the 1960s, a time where the same amalgamation of disciplines could be observed. And also cybernetics had their first peak. Some current popular science articles claim that the mathematical foundations we are dealing with today in AI research are not much different than they were then, only computing power improved. Would you agree? What kind of AI are we talking about at the moment when we speak about AI?
Okay, good question. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. First of all, mathematical theory of course is very strong and has been developed over centuries, and you could say the computing models and the software engineering models have been developed back 70, 60 years ago. However, of course, there are always new insights and new algorithmic approaches which improve the computing capabilities that we have. And the current hype on AI is not just because of extended computing power, but also because of new methods which made the machine learning more efficient by simply reinforcement learning, and that, so to say, changes a lot of classification approaches, categorization approaches. There are other machine learning approaches, other AI approaches, but currently there's a lot of excitement about the things that with deep machine learning, things go a lot faster than they used to be, and by that we can solve a lot more complex problems than before.
And what would you say, in what direction, which areas will AI develop next, and what areas you are especially looking into in your research?
Okay, I'm nowadays research manager, but over the day I've been with WBGU, which is the Advisory Council on Global Change, and along the workshops and discussion for the AI roadmap in Germany, I just work on a little abstract on how to use AI for the SDGs. And having told that, I would reply that I think AI is an interesting instrument for any automatization that we can think of. So choose an area, for example, medicine, medical analysis, individualized medicine, that's very interesting, or mobility, or sustainability, and so on and so forth. That's at least my hope, that we can do things a lot better than before.
It sounds a lot more realistic than what I heard today. Like, I learned during the day that AI is less godlike than it has biases at the moment, and that could be a problem. So I like to go into a little bit of into modeling and representation. Is intelligence a good subsummation of technical capabilities at all, or more an anthropomorphization of technology?
Okay, also this day I had good discussion with colleagues from DFKI, Alyosha Borchardt, for example, where we discussed that, well, artificial intelligence is the try to simulate or emulate human intelligence. However, on the other hand side, I think machine intelligence would be the better phrase because machines are different and they can do certain things a lot better than humans can do. On the other hand side, of course, cognition, emotion, and things like that are stronger on the human side. And the other question was?
The question was which explicit and implicit distortions could be contained in data models that are used for machine learning.
You've been with the bias. So along that, you need to understand, well, I think you know that it's not just about the algorithms, not about the methods, how to do learning. It's also about the data. And as long as we are not careful about the data being used to train the machine learning solutions, then bias can pop up. However, if we use, again, so to say, data generation, maybe we come across a lot fairer AI, fairness to be built in. And maybe we make those automated solutions better ones than we used to do, because you can nicely argue that humans overall are not very intelligent in quite a lot of things we are doing.
Today my impression was also a lot of ways to cope with AI at the moment is that human-centeredness is plays a big part, and that the human-centered development is also one of the hypotheses of the Weizenbaum Institute. And so why do you think it is so crucial, and where like the greatest potentials and challenges in that? Human-centered development.
Human-centered development. To be honest, I'm always a little irritated if people say now the next big thing or next phase is that we put the human into the center of consideration and development. I'd say every professional software hardware engineer had this in mind already decades ago. Of course, that doesn't need to be true for everyone, but there is a lot of code of ethics in ACM, IEEE, the German Computer Science Society that do exactly that. We do not build technology for the sake of technology, but rather to solve real issues.
Though that isn't implemented everywhere on the planet, right? Like there are cases that you can find. And that
definitely, there are commercial interests, and those commercial interests, I think, need to be balanced to put societal interest also in a good position, and we need to strengthen our voice about how to design the technical systems that we put in place along the digital transformation, that we follow certain rules like, I love to say, open standards, open formats, open interfaces. You can also argue about safety by design, security by design, privacy by design, and things like that. But this is, I'd say, more matter for society to shape, so to say, the requirements like that, and maybe to put here and there enforce certain regulations.
Okay, thank you very much for that insight. I'm going to try to craft like the moderation for our next guest. Out of that, we heard that UX plays always a big role, and I'd like to say that UX also plays a certain role in religion. Professor Robert Geraci is Professor of Religious Studies at the Manhattan College currently, and like with the hypothesis that both technology, sociology, and religion have such a great social resonance since they concern and mediate transcendent states, I'd like to lead over to this block and ask you, especially in two separate fields that religion and technology might concern. One is the role of, as well as religion as science and technology in a functional, differentiated society, and also virtualization, hybridization in structural change. And the first question is, like with a lot of what we see in the connection of religion, also technology with visual culture, we see counterparts of black boxes and iconography, publications, manuals to handle and visualize and explain processes, and at the same time, rituals and surface designs that prohibit critique. What role does popular culture and art play in the depiction and assessment of technology, and what we think they can do and can't do?
I think it's worth keeping in mind that there are actually ritual manuals also, that while a ritual in religion might be in some sense inoculated from change or critique in process, the reality of ritual is that it is debated behind the scenes, right, and discussed behind the scenes. And you could, for example, go to, say, go to Judaism and look at rabbis arguing over how to build a sukkah for Sukkot, and there's literally a part where they discuss whether you could use an elephant as one wall for the sukkah, which would seem to imply 3 elephants would also be legitimate. And then they go into a discussion about what you'd have to do with the elephant to make sure it was legitimate. So there are actual modes in religion for that kind of discourse, but then the ritual itself attempts to kind of protect itself from that. And we find that we have limited words for things, right? And you asked about art, and one of the things that I think art tries to do is look for different kinds of words. There are all kinds of power structures built into the way we do things, right? If we ask that question about human-centered computing, which humans are at the center? I mean, obviously it is in fact the case that somebody had a human being in mind when he or she constructed a system, but that person wasn't necessarily looking towards, say, the gain of all humankind or something like that. Occasionally, we have, for example, military robotics, which have a positive side, right? People maybe not dying at war. And then they have a really creepy negative side where, say, one military has robots and no people who die, and the other side only has people who die, right? So some people are at the center of that kind of model, and some people are being left out of it. And it's often hard to articulate what are the kinds of power that are flowing through a technical system, whether that technique is religious or computing. There are modes of power in that discourse, and one of the things that I think art tries to do is to then step out of those modes of conversation and say, can we break the way you've been thinking about it by giving you different kinds of words, right? A different kind of structure for how to have the conversation, whether that's a conversation about religion or a conversation about technology, or both of those two things combined.
Because you also researched that extensively, sometimes metaphors, especially the ones created in Hollywood movies, also are they playing a part in spreading fears about technology that is maybe unbased or maybe not?
They make better movies, right? When it's about something being terrible happening. I actually think You know, it depends a lot on your cultural context. For me, being American, I grew up in the Cold War. Many of the people who write about technology also grew up in the Cold War. They grew up with this kind of sense of imminent doom. And so the way that they engaged with the world was that it could end at any moment. And for some people, that was actually good news. Billy Graham, the Christian preacher, actually used to be in favor of nuclear war. He felt that Jesus would come along with it. So sometimes it's good news that the world's about to end, but for most of us, it's not. Right? Most of us would really rather put off nuclear war, and we'd rather put off robots taking over the world, but somehow we're just kind of caught up in a culture that says it's ending at any minute, right? And these forces that are beyond your control, right? So we have these technologies that are already beyond our control, right? There's no one in the room probably who could really explain all the way through how even his or her mobile phone works. And by the time you get to something that purports to be intelligent, what are the odds we wouldn't have built in something dangerous? I mean, that's kind of when you go to the conversation of bias and so forth, unfortunately, we have a tendency to build our biases into systems, and those biases are not our friend. But maybe we can have machines that can figure out how to adjudicate that more fairly, and that would be a lovely thing. We need new movies.
Which leads me to my next kind of two questions, which are also directed at both of you. Like I start with you, Robert, and then it's about exascale computing. So I think I can also ask that, how far we are with exascale computing research. Why are we so drawn to prophecies of doom, fears of being replaced by machines, and is AI only one step on our way to exascale computing or an exascale society? So is it always about something bigger? And then subsequently, how is the concept of AI connected with overcoming death and other utopias or dystopias?
Well, to repeat real quickly, many of the people having that conversation in the sort of Euro-American West were people who grew up with a kind of doomsday mentality, and so they're kind of caught in that. But there are other ways in which our religious and cultural strategies are at place in how people think about the prospect for intelligent machines. When we look, for example, at people who want to upload their minds into robots and live forever, they're playing out a very Christian apocalyptic vision. If you look at the ancient Jewish and Christian apocalypses, these ancient texts, they describe a world of alienation where good is fighting against evil in one form or another, and evil's winning. And the only way for us to get out of that trap is for God to recalibrate the world, make a wonderful new one, and then give us wonderful new bodies to live in that world. And we see the exact same thing when you're looking at people who want to upload their minds into robots. And I'm not saying that won't be possible. Personally, I'm skeptical. But I could be wrong, and I'm willing to grant that, right? But the idea that human beings are already finite, we're limited in ways we wish we weren't. It's hard even to do simple things like learn new things. Earlier today, I was the only person in the room who didn't speak German. Wouldn't it have been convenient if I could have learned German for the day? But unfortunately, not possible. So, we wish we could...
there's the Bible for that soon.
Yeah, those technologies are getting amazingly better, right? And we can all be just thrilled for those changes. But as it stands, we learn very slowly. We do age and we do die. And none of us are pretty excited about that. And when you can intervene with a kind of technology that says, well, look, we're going to have ways that are better ways of learning, direct transmission that allows information to go from one system to another, well, that looks pretty good. And then, remember The Matrix when Keanu Reeves opens his eyes and he's like, I know Kung Fu. And it's this great moment. What like 9-year-old boy didn't wish there was a way you could, and maybe the girls too, I don't know, that you could learn Kung Fu, instantly. So we want that, right? And then the idea that maybe this technology could become also an intervention in our own deaths, it's just appealing. Even though it's also mixed in with all kinds of other existential threats to humanity that we fear and wonder about.
Apropos hardship and existential threats, what I was observing also was that AI and our concept of works are also connected to validating one's existence through work, and that maybe also religion is especially appealing to people who have to endure hardships. So do you see any connections in our perception of emerging technologies as well as religious concepts or governance models, technology and work?
Was that on the piece of paper you
Yeah.
were? These questions are only getting harder. So certainly it is the case that both technical systems and religious systems structure the way people do work, right? And we do develop a feeling of meaning from many of our labors. I would fear that machine intervention for some people might cost them the opportunity to build meaning in that sense. But a lot of jobs provide no meaning as it is, right? There's that guy who wrote the whole book on what he called bullshit jobs. I'm sorry if I'm not supposed to cuss.
It is absolutely fine.
But the premise of it was that something like half of Americans are working a job that they themselves believe to be bullshit and that they shouldn't have to do because it serves no good for anyone. Well, probably we could either get rid of those or automate those or whatever, and that would be beneficial. If people then solely look to religion for meaning, I mean, we start seeing weird mixtures, right? Because traditional religions don't work for everybody. Religions of technology, religions of enchantment often do. I think all of us, maybe it's just the religious studies scholar in me, I think all of us are fundamentally religious in some fashion. That doesn't mean we're institutional about it. It doesn't mean we believe in gods or magical spirits, but we still see enchantment and magic in the world. We go looking for that. And technology can provide that, right? Whether it's Pokemon Go and looking for the monsters that are roaming through the room, or whatever other kinds of technology that suddenly become the way in which you could structure things and make the world meaningful for you. I probably didn't answer your question at all. I just answered one of my own questions because it was easier.
It was brilliant. Also, you were mentioning something that helps me very much. Like, I like to conclude this blog, and I promise to make time for questions, but we have to fit that in later because otherwise we're like way out of time. But it is good that I can conclude with Arthur C. Clarke in a way, because we also heard about him earlier, and he so famously put that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I'd like to thank you very much that you explained magic to us, and from magic we come to enchantment, from enchantment we come to art, and a round of applause for Professor Schieferdecker and Professor Geraci, and I'd like to welcome Diana and Regis on stage. Dr. Diana Zerbanescu is an engineer, researcher at Weizenbaum Institute as well, and a colleague of Ina Schieferdecker, and also a performance artist. As well as Regis Lambert, who is a speculative designer and researcher, and together they form the collective Replica. And maybe you have noticed that there's a setup on stage already. Now we do a little experiment because we're talking about something that people haven't seen, and more about your art practice at the moment. So I'd like to explain, I'd like to try something like a cultural transition, because religion, as we heard about, is also a form of embodied knowledge and a kind of human and another entity interaction, and maybe also performance elements. And that is also big elements of your artistic approach to AI, right? So human-machine interaction, reinforcement loops, and the amalgamation of scientific methods and aesthetics again. As a replica, you are bridging categories and asking yourselves questions like, how can we build a connection between culturally patterned behaviors encapsulated in ritual and the future? Could you give us a little bit more insight of what you mean by that, and what your three most important forms of work are that you do at the moment?
Yes, of course. thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank you very much, Katerina, for the question. And thank you very much, Christian and Stephanie, for inviting me here tonight. I'm very excited to be on this panel together with such inspiring scientists and artists I've been admiring for a long time. So yeah, I think it's very interesting to connect the body knowledge and the embodied cognition with technology and with artificial intelligence. Our practice in Replica is rooted from my background as an engineer and researcher, but also at my practical and theoretical training as a performing artist. I was very inspired by studying and training in exploratory bases, like in the forest camp at the Grotowski Institute. Jerzy Grotowski, which is one of the very big theater makers, it's a big inspiration for me. And he drew a lot of inspiration from folklores and from traditions and from rituals. He brought all that knowledge on stage, and he used it as a methodology, as a theater training for artists. And I do believe there is a lot of wisdom and a lot of knowledge that is very important there. And I think that that knowledge and that wisdom should definitely be somehow bridged with our technological devices and should be incorporated into the way we think about the future. I think the way our technology developed nowadays is so fast-paced that we don't think so much about all the rituals that we create around it, or we don't think about so much designing proper rituals around it. And I think theater could be a very good mediator between the old and the new, and this is what we try to do with Replica. We try to create an environment where we can experiment, where we can bring the old traditions back into the modern society, see what we can learn from that repository of wisdom, and how can we connect and bridge that old wisdom and knowledge with the most cutting-edge research, with technology and with creative fiction.
You introduced me to that great quote that the stage can act as a simulation environment for the future in which alternative scenarios can be safely rehearsed and explored. Is that comparable with a sandbox, like what engineers would do with the sandbox?
Actually, yes. Of course, because I have this double training as an engineer and as a performing artist. I studied performing art after I did my PhD in computer science, and I couldn't help but see connections and see similarities between the performance space and programming. Of course, like you have a script that you have to follow, you have then a performance running in real time, and I think the beauty of having this performative space where you can safely reenact scenarios and explore is that you can play with time. You can take isolate behaviors from normal life and then play and replay and practice human to human interaction, and you can turn back time. In real life, you don't have this luxury. Like, we are all actors in our own life, but we don't have time to rehearse. And when thinking about the future and designing futures, I think it's nice to use this environment that we have in theaters to actually rehearse for the future. One other important practitioner, theater practitioner that has inspired me a lot is Augusto Boal. And one of his saying was that theater in itself, it's not revolutionary, but it's the rehearsal for a revolution. And I do strongly believe it's a good environment for rehearsing human behavior and even human-machine interaction. Why not?
From the data you gathered so far in your workshops, for instance, what would you say, what can one learn from theater practices about negotiating agencies with machines, for instance?
That's a very interesting question. it draws also upon my practical training in theater. In theater, there is a lot of emphasis placed on negotiating agencies between between performers, and there are a lot of exercises targeting of developing this non-verbal communication, this body language, almost like intuition, empathy. Many practitioners are referring to animal energy. And I've been, as a scientist, I've been all the time intrigued by those methodologies and techniques, and I was thinking about how to quantify those connections and relationships. And then I kept on thinking about what if in certain exercises you replace one of the human element in the interaction and you replace it with a robot, with a machine. Is that robot going to be able to negotiate non-verbally that performative space in the same way? For example, there is this exercise when you have to create trust between two performers and one of them is blindfolded and has to trust another performance driving around the room. In a way, I think this is a very good metaphor for our relationship of trust with technology. If we blindfold ourselves and let ourselves guided by a very intelligent AI who gives us exactly the path around the room, would we be able to trust that entity? Can we develop such exercises? Can we learn something from theater to when designing our interfaces?
And then I was reading an article about artistic renderings and the interaction with AI, and a curator named Ben Vickers, he identified 3 roles that AI can have, like the impersonator, collaborator, or creator of artistic practice. Would you agree with that in your artworks and performances?
Definitely. I think so. The way Replica thinks about artificial intelligence is exactly through those 3 aspects. We are thinking about AI as an external observer who can give us insight about the relationship between people within a group. So an external observer who can gather some information about what's happening within a group dynamics, and then can predict or can give us an insight about the patterns that are being formed over time, things that we are not able to see. So, and then would be very nice to also have that entity coming inside the space, so being part of the group and becoming a co-creator, an artistic partner. And it's about negotiating agency, as I said before, so to have this relationship. But also, yeah, you can have the AI stepping in the role of the creator or the performer itself, and then just leave the stage to the machine. So I think, yes, of course, it's possible.
Are there any questions from the audience at this point? Okay, then again, I'm very much looking forward to the performance at the end of this evening, and yeah, I'm very excited of what we're going to see and what we can learn about technology from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And next in line is Luba Elliott. Luba is a curator, artist. If you want to, you can exit the stage. Yeah. Luba is a curator, artist, and researcher specializing in AI and in the creative industries. Welcome. Yeah. Do we do the slides first? No, we do the slides first.
The slides first.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I have some slides to show you, and I hope they will come up on screen. Let's see. Oh, yes, we do have some slides. So I'm going to give you an overview of some recent projects that use and think about AI. And yeah, we're going to start at this point with Deep Dream. How many of you have seen this type of images before? Yeah, wow, so a lot of people. This is good. Yeah, so this is a project that came out about 3.5 years ago from one of the Google offices in the US. And to me, it's really the starting point of the recent fascination with using machine learning and AI techniques to create art. Though, of course, there is a history of using computers and robotics in the field already. And the way this deep dream technology works is like this. So hopefully this video might play. Yeah, it will. So you have an image, and then you have the neural network that tries to find familiar shapes and features in it. So you have this portrait of an artist, and yeah, the algorithm finds various kind of pagodas and puppy slugs and so on in it. And yeah, it's resulted in some very aesthetically pleasing projects, such as this image from Mike Tyker, who is also one of the co-authors on the paper. And yeah, I think this type of image really sparked the mainstream and the journalist interest in the field, because in some ways you could say that these neural networks are being creative by imagining kind of various things, say images, animals, in an image when they are not there. And then came the style transfer. And yeah, so you have an image. I think this was developed actually in Tübingen, so in Germany. And so you have an image, and then you can change it into the style of Monet or Edvard Munch or some other artist. And yeah, I think this became really popular with this app called Prisma. And yeah, people started playing around with it a lot. And in terms of artists, you had Gene Kogan, who tried to yeah, change the look of Mona Lisa in Cubist, Impressionist, and Pointillist styles. Then he also tried to broaden the definition of style transfer, because if you speak to the art community about style transfer, they're often quite negative about it, because some of them feel it's a bit of a pastiche, or it's an easy way out. It's not actually doing anything interesting on you. But yeah, this is an example where style transfer is, I think, quite cool, because you have this kind of calligraphy, you have some astronomical imagery, and you have Google Maps that are all used as a style for Mona Lisa. So yeah, these are quite fun projects. And then came the GAN, so generative adversarial networks, and I think numerous variations are very popular in creating visual art today. And this is some work by Meyer Klingemann, who I would say is one of the pioneering artists using some of these techniques. And yeah, recently he won a Lumen Prize for Digital Art, which I think to the creative AI community of technical artists was quite a big achievement to be kind of recognized by the art world. And yeah, whenever I show his images, people sometimes say that these figures remind you of Francis Bacon or Egon Schiele or some other artist. But when I talk about this to Mario, he will say that there was no intention to look like an early kind of 20th century artist there in his work. It's just what the machine picked out from the images that it was trained on. So yeah, and there are some more images from him. So if you're not familiar with his work, he's very prolific on Twitter under the alias Quasimodo, and he frequently looks at kind of how you can represent the human face or the human body using the latest machine learning techniques. And now we have Anna Ridler, and I like her work because rather than thinking too much about the algorithm, she likes to think about the data sets and the importance they play in the final work that is created. So she watched this film called Fall of the House of Usher. And yeah, it's a 1929 silent film. And then she proceeded to make, about, I think, 300 drawings. And she trained a machine learning algorithm to generate images in her style. And then she got this animation. So yeah, so you can see it is in some ways resembling the film, and in some places it's maybe a bit blurrier than in the others, and this is because the different sections of the film had kind of different amounts of data that they were trained on. So the less data there was, the kind of the less the machine had to learn from. So it's maybe a bit more blurry. And occasionally when I talk to Anna, she will say that in her artistic style, she might draw the eyebrows and the eyes in a similar fashion. And so the machine would get confused and kind of copy and amplify her mistakes, which is quite interesting as a tool if you want to learn more about your practice. And now I'll move on to some of the more maybe critical interpretations of AI and the role it plays in the current world. So there is this work by Constant Dulaert. And so the first image I showed, Deep Dream, that was about emphasizing the features in an image. And in his project, Constant Dulaert wanted to dull or kind of reduce the features in an image. So you had an image of people protesting, and then the output is kind of all blurry, and same here with Trump. And I think there's still a website active called dulldream.xyz, and if you go on there, it will do that to your image. And for this artist, it was an opportunity to kind of try to escape some of these kind of facial recognition technologies, because, yeah, I don't know how recognizable this is as Trump. But yeah, it's a way for you to try and kind of hide your face from some of the systems that exist. And here is another way of hiding your face. I'm not sure this still works now, because obviously a lot of these tools and techniques are advancing. But Adam Harvey has a project called CV Dazzle, which is about figuring out what you can do to your face to avoid being detected by facial recognition algorithms. So at some point in time, and I think this was maybe about 3 years ago now, if you had some markers on your cheeks, then then the algorithm would not detect a face on your face. And same also with certain hairstyles. So if you had a crazy fringe, that would help you hide away from the algorithm. And kind of going back to think about the importance of data in how these systems work and the output and the judgments they make. There is an artist called Mimi Onoha who was thinking about kind of what is currently missing from the current world of data. And she made like this cabinet that is a filing cabinet, and there are lots of folders there that kind of represent what is missing. And she found that it's mainly data from minorities or from niche communities that is missing and is therefore kind of not communicated or not taken into account when these systems are being trained. And again, this is a project that is a couple of years old, and I know from speaking to the artist that she's mentioned that some of these data sets now kind of exist or are being applied in certain situations. So I guess this is an example of how some artistic work can help bring about change. And yeah, Caroline Sinders is an artist who also looks at this data spectrum, and she thinks about how you can make the process of data collection into an artwork yourself by kind of running various workshops to construct a feminist data set that kind of that looks at data from a female point of view and uses yeah, some of the missing terminology from that. And yeah, there is Sebastian Schmieg, who did this project that allowed you to categorize lots of photographs from famous artists such as Cindy Sherman or Trevor Paglen, and you could categorize them in 4 categories. So you had the problem and the solution, and the past and the future. And these are some of the images that, yeah, so this project, it was outside the Photographers Gallery in London, and you could also go on the website, and as a human yourself, you could categorize those images, so kind of do some of the work that the machines are sometimes doing, and so you can also see for yourself how difficult it is. And these are the images that most people voted for as a problem. So you can see children, power stations, cars, and this became the solution. So Arts Council, parrots, so yeah, I don't know, a bus. And images of the past included ice cream, camera, and then lots of black and white images I can see. And for the future, we had children, people with guns, eclipses. So yeah, you can see that some of these images are certainly very difficult to maybe put into one category. And if it's difficult for us humans, then maybe it's not so easy for the machines as well. Yeah, so this is another project that I like because it thinks about the role of the artist and how the process works. And it's called Predictive Art Bot, and it's by Nicolas Maigret and Maria Rostkowska. And so it's a bot that generates concepts for artworks based on, I think, news or media articles. And yeah, so this is an example. A feminist land art piece divulging classified information about online dating. And yeah, this was all generated by a bot. But if, like me, you've been to enough media art exhibitions, you will know that this very much could be a concept for an artwork. And here are some more concepts that the algorithm came out with. A robotic fridge collecting oddities about globalization, or a post-internet malware to materialize the bias of whistleblowers. So the idea with this bot was that it was generating these concepts, and then the artists put out a call for human artists to take one of these concepts and then actually make it into an artwork, which I think subverts the traditional kind of role of the human giving the machine the instructions. Like, this way it's the machine that gives you, the human, the instructions of kind of what to do. And yeah, I think some of the projects that came out of that were shown at Transmediale a couple of years ago, but I don't have the images. And now I think this is the last artwork I mentioned. And it's by Julien Desweff and Matt Plummer-Fernandez. And there is this website called Thingiverse, which is which is a website that has a lot of 3D printing designs. And I think it's got quite an active community of people uploading designs and so on. And these are some examples of designs you can find on there. And what they did is they created a bot that made a mashup of 2 random designs, and to create designs like this, which is called an open overload nozzle. And yeah, I'm not quite sure what it is or what it does, because both of these were kind of invented and to me as a human don't make much sense. And yeah, this was a bot that kept posting these kind of new designs all the time. And what I found very curious about it was the reaction from the community. This is another example. And yeah, so these are some of the comments. So you had some people who were wondering if this was a spammer or if it was genuinely an artist who just wanted to communicate in this way. Then others were complaining that this bot hijacked the community and it was the one always on the front page, and therefore their work didn't get shown. And yet others were kind of curious about its strangeness and were just very happy that their work became part of it. So ultimately, the artists had a gallery show in, somewhere in the Netherlands, where they 3D printed those kind of bot-generated shapes. And yeah, you could vote whether it was art or spam. And yeah, I mean, this was shown in an art gallery, so maybe there was some influence there. And yeah, just to conclude, I have a couple of slides on interesting projects that you might be interested in. So I have a festival on AI and post-truth in the Netherlands at the end of next week, if you want to pass by. And I know we have, I think, a community of people here interested in AI. And so if you are doing some artwork with it, or if you are applying AI in art, design, and music, you can submit a paper or your artwork to this NIPS workshop on machine learning for creativity, which will take place in Montreal in December. And yeah, the deadline for that is the 28th of October. And yeah, if you have any questions, here are my details.
Dear Luba, thank you very much for putting order where chaos was, like a good algorithm would do. Thank you for that. I think my first question is directly directed at NIPS, and I didn't okay that with you before, so forgive me. What are you looking for in places like NIPS, and can you explain what the conference is for? Like, are there normally artists around, or what got you interested in working in that environment?
Yes, so I think NIPS is one of the main conferences for the machine learning community. So certainly if you're trying to do some cutting-edge research and you're looking to publish at a top conference venue, you might go to NIPS or ICML or ICLAIR or one of these kind of global conferences. And recently it has got quite big. So last year there were maybe 10,000 people attending. And yeah, so I hosted a workshop last year as well, and it's I feel it's quite a privilege to involve the technical community and encourage them to think about how they can, how the systems they are developing, how they can maybe use creatively, and also give them space to showcase their art, because whenever you go to these media art festivals, it's often kind of the same types of artists that are being represented. And I can understand that the curators want to invite people who have a strong concept and who want to say something about the society and the critical or the negative implications of the algorithms. But I feel sometimes that those who create visually pleasing and pretty aesthetic work get neglected. So that's one of my motivations.
Yeah, could you maybe say that that is a place where you balance technical issues and challenges of applying the latest generative models to creativity with philosophical and cultural issues that surround the area of research? Because that is in the description text, right?
It is in the description. I'm not sure it's quite like that in the reality,
Yeah.
because it's kind of mainly aimed at this technical community, and in my experience, they primarily have concerns of kind of developing a new model that beats a certain benchmark. Although, of course, nowadays more and more are being interested in the ethical issues that kind of surround the field. But yeah, judging from the workshop last year, we didn't have kind of so much input from the kind of cultural or the philosophical angle. And maybe also because there are other conferences for that. So there's the ICCC, the Conference on Computational Creativity, that tackles more the questions of philosophy. But with my workshop, it's more for the creative AI community, which focuses more on the applications and doing things.
And then I was wondering, because you see so many exhibitions and also so many about machine learning and AI art, I would assume, do you see there's a tendency to work with the obfuscation and non-knowledge of the audience mostly, or are there specific artworks where you see more sophisticated approach than maybe a GAN would be? And like, are you bored of GAN yet is the question, more or less.
Well, yeah, I feel, nowadays, certainly over the past couple of years, ever since the GAN was invented, it received a lot of interest and attention from the technical community. So all the technically minded artists also started kind of playing with it. And then kind of educators, such as I think Gene Kogan and others, helped to kind of create more easily applicable models and then kind of tell people how to use them. So I think they are quite popular, and yeah, I think that's kind of often the case with these methods. It seems to me that earlier in time, evolutionary algorithms were much more popular, and they have a very kind of different aesthetic. It can look, I guess, much more kind of abstract, depending on how you use it. So yeah, maybe the AI art world, in the technical sense, is now waiting for what is beyond the GAN. So recently we had this big GAN algorithm that came out from DeepMind, and I think it generates very photorealistic images. So I guess all the artists that have been using the GAN and who have been accustomed to kind of this certain kind of blurriness, or earlier in time with the lopsided features, they may now be able to work with technologies that produce much more realistic work, and they'll have to figure out how to communicate their intent and vision through that.
Thank you. And to conclude, I would like to ask, do you have an opinion about the role that art can play in giving people a more, I think, playful approach towards technology, or maybe can even help with the acceptance? And what do you think about that?
Yeah, that is a good point. I think art is a great tool for science communication and public engagement, because it can really make something visible, concrete, and familiar to those people who are maybe less interested in reading research papers. And but yeah, I think in my experience with the media art world, it seems to me that a lot of the exhibitions or festivals, they try to focus more on the kind of negative implications of using AI technology, and they invite a lot of artists who maybe deal with facial recognition or kind of the power dynamics in the field. And they focus less on the artistic potential of those tools. But on the other side, of course, you have kind of various, I think, Google entities, and they have at least a couple of projects that try to fund AI art, and those are often quite, I think, experimental. So I think what did they fund lately? Some work from Ross Goodwin, who created Sunspring, which is the first kind of short film that was written by an AI. And so they sent him on a road trip with this camera that was kind of, I think, captioning what it saw, and then kind of, making that into a story and a book that he has actually just published recently. So this is kind of showing how you can use these tools in your kind of process as an artist.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from the audience? We can pass around a mic. Otherwise, I'm sure you can also approach any speaker at the end of the event. Then I'd like to invite, thank you, Lua, very much. We see the second artistic intervention of the night, and I'd like to welcome Christian Mio-Leclerc, the artistic director of World Binaire, and he will introduce his work to you more in his presentation.
Thank you. 1 second. I have this friend with me, and while I try to get some water, I will make him speak for me.
You talking to me? You talking to me? You talking to me? Well, then who the hell else are you talking to? Talking to me? Well, I'm the only one here. Who the fuck do you think you're talking to? Oh, yeah? Huh? Okay.
So this is the young taxi driver, completely in love with the idea to protect a prostitute from her pimp. Then he buys himself a gun and goes home and plays this little encounter with an imaginary opponent. This is what he does, but that cannot resonate with you because you're probably not a taxi driver, not from New York, and you might not bought a gun to protect a prostitute from her pimp. But that is just what happens in that movie. It's not why it happens. Why it happens, and what you probably know, is he goes home. He looks in the mirror, doesn't really know who he is, and he says, "Who am I?" That is the only story here, and that is why it is so important. A question that also Narcissus was not able to answer, and I think this guy probably has the worst portfolio ever. So he broke too many hearts because he was basically not a nice guy. Then he was cursed to only love himself, which he did in the first place, and then he drowned while trying to kiss himself, and obviously he can't swim. So this whole portfolio is not really a winning thing. However, there is something poetic about it, because as soon as he was born, Theresia said he might have a long life under the sun if he fails to recognize himself. And there's some beef. It weaves together our ability to understand who we are with our ability to survive. And that is the only reason why over hundreds of years we still pass on that story, saying, don't look too close in the mirror or you might drown in yourself. That is the poetic beef, not the what. Today I believe we witness the most spectacular mirror of all times, which is technology. Why? Because it says so many deep sensations about us, and we could use them to reiterate forgotten stories and think about them again, discuss about them again, even though we feel they're not necessary anymore. However, technological discoveries are normally used for sensations. They become a thumb stop on Twitter. Someone said, Big Gun, for instance, is a beautiful discovery, right? It became a thumb stop. I had 20 minutes to think about it. Next. But I think it could be deeper sensations that we spend more time with and that we hopefully pass on generations and generations. Now, I have a studio called Waltz Binaire, and that's exactly what we try to do. We want to investigate how we can weave more sustainable and more poetic stories into continuously accelerating media and technology by actually using their narratives and asking why. And we do this for the big industry in the field of marketing and advertisement, as well as independent art, because we believe it matters to both. Because as if this attention span of us is decreasing, then both have a problem. It doesn't matter if someone won big prizes with new art, because if you have 6 seconds in social media, no one will listen. And if you have a new project or a new product or a new company that you want to motivate others to listen, they won't listen if you don't find the poetic contribution. That's what's interesting to us at Waltz Binaire. Now, I'm originally a dancer, to be more precise, a robot dancer. So I grew up in Eastern Germany, and when the wall came down around '92, hip-hop came to Europe, and I was directly into it. Now, today, actually, my first robot dancing teacher is here. He taught me to do so 18 years ago, and I'm very thankful, amigo. Now, however, it's a very difficult business, and I don't know why I tried it so long. I just know that it's a very weird sensation of being a human trying to be a robot. All of a sudden, you feel like it's so stressful, it feels like death. Because somehow you feel like this human thing in you is fighting everything. It doesn't want to be like all 90 degrees. It wants to be organic, but you have to shut it down. I kind of felt more alive doing so. On the other hand, I'm a computer scientist because my mother forced me to become a computer scientist also when I was 12. She was a software architect, and for her, the idea of an algorithm is the articulated sorting of your thoughts, and she thought I might be a little bit messed up. But what I try to do is code little pseudo-organic systems. So I like this idea of this machine being dead, doing something that looks alive. So it started with Turbo Pascal and Christmas trees, and it evolved over time, so everything that you see today is only generated with mathematics. And yeah, this both I did just for fun, because that's what kids do, but now 25 years later, I would like to describe my philosophy as followed. So we behave more and more digital, right? Look at me, I'm even a robot dancer. And then we have machines, and they become more and more organic. And if we lay them on top of each other within an artistic process, we don't see the redundancy that we just created. We see more clearly what makes the machine, and the human, the human. It's exactly those things that we were not able to copy. And I have that thesis that computer science was in the beginning just about this. Trying to copy everything that we humans do, to kind of hope about this religious magic, saying there might be that one thing left that we cannot copy. And then we finally understood what makes us. So let's take this more precise example of those guys here. They're top 4 world-ranked b-boys. They dance since 10, 15 years here. They're completely physically beyond Olympic gymnasts. It's a whole different planet. They're from the moon. It's unreal what they're able to do so. And they basically generate this quality all by themselves, dancing on the streets, since they are about 8 years old. And while they did this, they feeded their whole family with street dancing. And that's how their body looks. So within their physical ability and their responsibility as children that they have for their whole family, they're quite close to being perfect. They're like robots. But if you pick one out and you go a little closer and you project true mathematical precision in their face, all of a sudden they don't look perfect anymore. They look more fragile. Through the microscope of mathematics, they become more organic than they have been before. And that is, to me, poetic. artists, we like to work with technology, which you see on the left, a representation of it, and poetry. Now, they're not necessarily the same, and let me try to describe what's the difference here. We can attract with technology as long as it's a magical sensation and cause attention. Unfortunately, that's it. And as long as we have that intention, we have to weave poetic stories so we resonate with them. Now, the whole discussion about what is a technique and what is actually a poetic expression has a long discussion in art. And I would like to give a little overview of what it meant in dance in the 20th century. So this right here, this is not a poetic expression, even though it is very poetic. It is a technology. Now, this is Martha Graham, and she's the legendary inventor of the modern dance, the first big revolution after ballet. Now, her idea here is a set of rules, how to communicate and how to behave in order to demonstrate suffering people. It is very known, as you still saw in the 70s, people fainting in movies like this, because they have learned how to move like modern dancers. However, this is a cable, it's a technology, it's like a virtual reality glass, it's not a piece. This right here is a piece. This is Sacre de Printemps, The Rite of Spring, by Igor Stravinsky, done in 1914. And perfectly released to the beginning of the First World War, he created a piece so dark towards classical music like Aphex Twins or heavy metal. People were like, what's that kind of crazy rhythm? How can you be so crazy? And the ballet dancers, Nijinsky, they danced with their heel down on the ground as if they wanted to say, let's go back where we're coming from. It was a horrible piece, and people associated it actually with the First World War, saying, well, maybe we lost our virginity, the ritual of spring going into the First World War. Now, that is a poetic expression. 50 years later, Pina Bausch said, let's take this music again and tell a whole different story about the ritual of spring. Maybe it is the ritual of spring, the losing of the virginity, that when we grow up and we treat each other the way we shouldn't, when we fall in love and all the drama starts, maybe that is the ritual of spring. And maybe let's use and combine this with the technology of the suffering people. And she brought it together, and that gave such an explosion towards the whole market of modern dance that it finished the technology of modern dance. No one wants to see it anymore. Why? Because someone said it perfect, and we were able to move on. So if you today think that fainting like this is cheesy, it is only because she said so. She moved culture, and we were able to move on and tell new stories. Get rid of that technology and discover the next technology, the era of contemporary dance and contemporary art. Now, currently at the laboratories, we are very interested in artificial intelligence, of course, but not necessarily in the technology, because that's what scientists do. But searching for our small Sacre de Printemps, what is the most poetic story we could possibly tell that hopefully resonates with others? And I saw many algorithms, and they just didn't relate it to me. I didn't felt what could be done here. But then I saw this algorithm. It's called image to text. It's an algorithm that looks at this image and turns it into a sentence. And I was completely crazy about this algorithm, even though it's not visually at all. But I felt this idea that I see things and I decode them, and you hear them, and you encode them, and then you see them too. That's completely magical. It's telepathy, and we don't know any other thing that is able to perform this on our level of complexity. I thought we should maybe do something with it before it becomes a thumbstop on Facebook. So we investigated it not from a scientific perspective, but from an artistic. What could it now look at? And more importantly, as we turn this into an artistic sensation for humans, what do you always look at and never fully understand? A good example, for instance, is art. We took photography and showed it to this algorithm. And he's very good at actually understanding what's in that image. But as soon as it gets more crazy, of course, he gets problems. And here's the thing, you get problems too, defining what's in there. Maybe that's the sense of this artist. And that's my favorite one. That makes complete sense. As this is a baseball player, you see the stick, you see the ball, you see, but I'm very sure the Bauhaus performer is not happy about him being a baseball player, but everything kind of makes sense, and we liked it. Then we continued actually performing a Rorschach test, saying like, tell us how you feel, and we did this 1 year before MIT, just saying. And if you see also a close-up of a bird on a tree, then the possibility that you're psychological sick is by 82%. So you feel like this is a sensation. It could be a nice thumb stopper. It could be something that you laugh about, but it doesn't matter to you, because you've probably never been tested with this thing and you don't care. So we continued asking ourselves, what could be the thing that you all look at the most, that you basically see the most often, yet you have no idea what it is? And we thought maybe, again, it's yourself. You look at yourself and you have no clue what it is. So we built a machine that does the same. So this is Narciss. It's a small robot with a naked body, and that's his motherboard. And on top of it, he has a little head, which is a web camera. And we placed this naked body with his head in front of a mirror, forced him to only see himself. And on the back of his body has a little screen. And on that screen, we can look at what he's currently investigating, and he writes down in little text what he thinks he is. Now, why do I think this matters? Consciousness in general has been probably the mother of all discoveries. So we found out, oops, I exist. I'm not sure if it went down like this, but I can't state it, first of all, because I'm an artist, and second of all, because no one knows. So let's say it was like that. I exist. And in that moment, I started to communicate with others. I started to pray. I started to design my environment the way I wanted. It is the mother of all discoveries. At the same time, however, it's the origin of all ugliness. Because the moment we found out that we are conscious, we defined and pointed out at everything that is not conscious. So we divided the world in two different ones. For those that are like us, and we created heaven. And for those that are different than us, and we created hell. So this combination, being very close, we thought might be a nice poetic story. And so here, please meet Narciss as probably the most useless machine ever created. At the same time, it's the first machine that performs what's holy to us. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. What's very intriguing to me about your art is that that's clearly narrative-driven and very poetic. So I was asking and wondering myself, current technical intelligence consists in big parts of offering interfaces to organic, neuronal, mental, and social intelligence. And in the same way, maybe your art does that by combining myth and machines. Can you relate to that your storytelling is embedded in a socio-technical context, like for instance in Narciss?
Yeah, probably. I'm not sure.
Yeah, storytelling.
I'm not sure. I think that is, that's my task, or that's what I would like to accomplish. I do believe that's my only chance to resonate. And I would like to give an example also from generative design. If I use data from others, then combine it with software from others to make an artwork for others, then my people will discuss with me about who is the ownership in the art market of who? Others. There is no connection. The only thing I possibly can do is finding a meaning where there is none before. So I think it's our obligation to, like Pina Bausch said, it's not about what we dance, it's about why we dance. So we need to find a why. That is not necessarily the task of scientists, but definitely, in my opinion, the task of artists. And that's why storytelling is important. So again, with this, for instance, I couldn't care less what he says about himself. And we didn't order Balanescu Quartet playing Mother for him, or the most expensive crematorium for 60 million euro here in Berlin for him. It's because we are pathetic. It's a piece about humans and not a piece about robots. Yeah.
Then it is also very much about resemblance, that humans are always looking for resemblance to machines or something that they can relate to. What narratives would you say can technological development not replace, and what challenges do we have to look for answers for outside of the realm of art?
I'm not sure because if the technology can replace or something, it would describe if we are unique or not, and I'm not sure if I know this or if I could ever become an authority in this. That is probably the idea of digital creation. Maybe a little big for me, but for instance, maybe our intention to be special is quite unique. That doesn't mean that we are special, but we search quite a lot. We sit here and discuss. Narciss doesn't care, like if I break down the mirror, he still looks straight on and describes whatever is in front of him. But we have a very big interest in ourselves, and that might make us very special, yeah.
Are there questions from the audience right now? Yeah.
Hello, I have a question whether Claude Shannon was an inspiration to you, because his ultimative machine was a useless machine. When you turned it on, then it turned itself off.
No, I like it. I wish I would have done something so cool, so cool, so quick. Yeah, not really. Like I'm very inspired by Turing, the Turing test. But not in a way, and I think the test has been many times misunderstood. He's a mathematical genius, but his imitation thing has nothing to do with mathematics, and it was completely misunderstood. He said, basically, in my opinion, or in my words, he said, well, I don't know if humans can think, but I'm continuously asked if machines can think. Well, I don't know. What do I know about humans thinking? I know that they continuously talk. That is their behavior. He's actually a behaviorist. Now, all of a sudden, I'm so fair to say, well, you can think. That's what we do when we are fair to each other. So whenever there will be a machine that we talk to, then we need to be as fair to that machine too. Now, people started investigating how they could make machines talk. He never was interested in this. He actually talked about humans and their idea about them self-thinking. And that is somehow what inspired to me a little Narciss. I'm not saying it's conscious. I want to question if we are. Yeah. It's the same narration with biased data. Also in our words, there's a weird duality about digital behavior and digital entities and our entities. It's very weird that all of a sudden those machines become biased. I think it's a perfect time to keep them biased as much as possible and then really sink it in and feel it. How is that feeling what we have created? Now, this data directly comes from our behavior. We put a lot of people that are minorities in prison. And all of a sudden this machine thinks minorities belong to prison. We'd be like, you can't say that on stage. We have morals. Well, it's the perfect time to think about our morals, how much they resonate in space.
Okay. By that you were already talking about reflection, awareness and fairness. Do you have any concluding ideas or an idea at how art or the interaction of art and technology can help to hardwire these principles into our future developments of technology, maybe, and tools we use?
I'm sorry, I can't really tell simply because I can't imagine humans without either one. Yeah. And there is no art, there is no technology, and vice versa, I do believe. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. Any more questions from the audience? Because otherwise, a big applause for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And two very short announcements. First of all, we're going to have a 5-minute setup, change of setup now, where you are invited to have a drink outside, but you only have this 5 minutes. I'm very strict about that. And then we all meet again inside here and going to see the performance of Replica that we already talked about and are looking forward to. And then I also like to thank, in the name of State and Fraunhofer FOKUS, the audience already for being here and witnessing all the wonderful artistic renderings of AI and hearing reflections, how technology and art can interact and how that can provide us with insights for the development of technology. And I thank you very much for that. And also I would like to announce that the State Studio, who curated this evening, has its opening on the 27th of October in Schöneberg, and you're all very warm-heartedly invited for that as well. Thank you very much, and see you in 5 minutes.